30 minutes, so I'll quickly go through it because originally I had prepared for slightly more. I have divided this into three issues. One is to talk about some of the contemporary management issues and introduce you to one of the areas which we are currently working on, which the Vice Chancellor also had mentioned about complexity. So which we are trying to look at what you call as complex adaptive systems and how do you really work on that. Then a second one as a part of, I am fundamentally a trade union. I come from a trade union background. Actually, I went into management because my political party wanted me to unionize the college. That's where I then drifted into management. I have my own work on human rights and labor rights. A couple of multinationals hate me for my work, which has been very, very publicly quoted nowadays because we came up with compensation patterns of chief ministers and ministers, which got published in the first paper of a newspaper, which became an issue for some of the ministers, and the ministers made that an issue for me. We have something called as the wage indicator of the Paycheck India project, which looks at compensation around the world, and it runs one of the largest compensation databases in the world. We have a very interesting pattern of looking at a wage disparity between genders, which is called gender pay, which is one of the large system studies in gender payback, and this got also covered in the media for a very wrong reason again. But thankfully, Sevenberg, which is a sister of the Facebook founder, in her book, Sandy, in her book called Lean In, had actually picked up our work. So I have some credibility because some American has talked about it, which is one of our, sad parts. Though currently in terms of discovering, what management is, we are spending time. For example, our team has possibly traveled around 700 kilometers on in the Bombay suburban railway lines, trying to discover what makes the Dabbawalas work. And we have actually found out that a very interesting, my operations research colleagues hate me for telling that, Six Sigma is an accident. They never knew that it was Six Sigma till it was Six Sigma. If somebody came and some American came and told them it's Six Sigma. But there are some inherent principles which come from their fundamental belief in Lord Krishna, and which we are trying to look at the epistemology of that into what does food mean to Lord Krishna and why they are serving with so level of perfection. The same like thing of diamond workers in Surat, we are trying to look at it, who actually would say, yesterday I was with one of those India's leading diamond and gold jewelry, where they actually says that, look, we are trying to make how do we typically make a woman beautiful? And the issue of diamond, and they say that we are not workers, we are Regna Kalakars. And how those possibly the crown and the effect really gives that 57 faces of the diamond, how it is shaped by a very illiterate person sitting somewhere in Surat. And also we are now looking at Angadias, another set of the most trustworthy courier system. Trying to discover some of those basic principles of management to find out that what really makes organizations click, who really did not know what management is because they have never read any management books. It does not mean that I don't read. Okay, here we are talking about where are we headed to. This has been an outcome of a study which has been done in the Cranfield University about what's the future. This possibly in 2009, where we have actually found, and this is something which almost all the books talked about, says that from a directive top down, it is to fast moving, leading and collaborative. Things are spreading so fast that you can disrupt technologies, you can disrupt options very, very quickly. And this we are really seeing at the cutting edge of space. For example, in Kerala, there is something known as Startup Village, which is a which is a small or a big building. It is close to 1,000 engineering college students are working on all sorts of stupid projects. Some creative, some wacko ideas. These guys are getting funded by government of Kerala, a small seed fund. They are coming there, sitting there with the laptops, trying to find maybe an Android application. So, I was particularly critical with the IT secretary who talked about it. I said that, okay, yeah, can do that, do that something, because you have to, you have to give them some engagement, so please do that. Till on the flight I met an investment banker who is known as a vulture funder, who actually has made 3 visits to that place already. And his issue was that I am looking for that blockbuster idea which will disrupt a corporate, and I will go and buy that corporate which is down the drain. He knows that these guys will screw up someone, but I'm going to make money because those guys are going to get screwed by some kid who, with the laptop, who's possibly doing an MCA. Okay, MBAs don't innovate anyway, but who's doing an MCA or an engineering, sitting somewhere in the corner and coming up with a stupid application which possibly might take one of the large companies off its route. And I'm really tracing for that, and I'm putting my hopes on it, and I know that these guys would pay. And that's the level of the leading and the collaborative ecosystem which is getting created around the world. And this is one thing very, very wonderful which is possibly going to happen. You're talking about task and management people, which is topically about HR. No, you're really talking about self-managed organizations. I decide with your MBA degree, if you cannot self-manage, nobody else cannot manage you. Increasingly, self-management is becoming, and many organizations that my own issues of self-management versus the organizational rigid system of management do conflict with each other. Of course, incremental change, you talked about big and the powerful, but you're talking about lean, agile, nimble. The concept of micro multinationals is coming back. There was way back in 2000s, I read about this concept of micro multinational, which says that 15 or 20 employees spread across the world, I'm technically a multinational. Then people all talked about it, but we are really coming about it. There is this recent, I was reading in one of this McKinsey review, which actually said that a lot of big guys used to say that some of these small guys cannot disrupt my game anymore. But now they are also scared, is because it's the small guys, because they are agile, they are nimble, their overheads are very low. These are the guys who can help. Compliance enforcing have to confine to a particular pattern. And that's the way of the world. This is what my market research possibly tells about it. You're talking about adapting to the situation. Look at possibly how those Android phones have evolved, the apps have evolved. It's all about adapting to these situations. Some click, some do not click. But at the same time, the world is also highly becoming regulated. You need to play the game according to the regulation. Conflict, of course. People are talking about planning, which again Rajesh was talking about, that planning, and I can plan, I can do this and control the destiny. People are now telling, I cannot really predict what really happens, but what I can do is that through my way of looking at data, the way I approach the agile mindset which I create, can shape my future. That's where we are talking about very nimble and very flexible firms, which brings back to the issue of we are really talking about from the EQ movement, where people talked about by telling that intelligence is not that great. What you really require is emotional quotient, which possibly telling us that no, intelligence is also required, because I need a person who is rather smart, intelligent. because the complexity of change is so much that I need a smart person or an intelligent person who can understand the complexities and adopt accordingly. At the same time, I need a person who has the soft skills who can work. So it's actually really talking about not an yes, either or not. You are talking about a balance of both. I need a combination of hard skills, I need a combination of soft skills. Of course, hierarchical, flat, self-organizing, purpose-driven, and the last one is from a command and control system, you're getting into what you call as discovery and democratization of organizations. You are talking about a lot of organizational democracy, of multiplicity of ideas handling diversities. Today evening after this, I'm getting in a conference call with a multinational which really talking about how do you create careers for PWDs, which is actually called person with disabilities. How are you really, the moment we are getting into this thing is that how do you really enforce this rights of gays, lesbians and transgenders in this organization? Because they are all very, very integral part of our ecosystem. And organizations are really getting into it, particularly with physically challenged people. How do you provide them a career? Because why can't possibly a person who has a disability, and fundamentally I also am colorblind, fundamentally with a disability sit on the what you call CEO seat? How do I design? And these are some of those very, very pertinent issues which organizations are really thinking about. The same thing about with something which we can talk about with what you call, in fact, I was talking to Mr. who picked me up, who was talking about, how we were talking about how women go out of, the labor market, once possibly for families. And they cannot really enter back, and all of them end up possibly as consultants or part-timers. Along with avatar consultants, we are possibly engaging into a work. My student Rupsli from IIT Chennai is leading that initiative with avatar consultants called Rebound Management. How do you help these people who are exiting the labor market to rebound back into organizations? Simply from an economic, my interest is not just seeing more women in the workplace. My simple is purely from a strategic point of view, from a pure economics point of view. If I have educated 120 girls in my MBA program, 60 of them take up jobs, 25 of them wean out early, 15 of them out of the 15 of them who stay back, possibly 10 of them are not able to really make up to it, and I have to do with 8. I'm creating an economic crisis. My cost of employment is going to go up because I'm not able to accommodate the rest of the, accommodate 60 or 70, 80% into my labor market. Which means that so many scarce number of men chasing for their positions, which really help me to push up the wages. It's good for men, but as a corporate, my sustainability, financial sustainability becomes a fundamental question. So my entire logic is the fact is that from a financial sustainability point also, it really makes sense that I rebound them back. And what can be do about? There is a lot of, that is what we talked about as democratization of work. And this is something which has been taken from a PhD dissertation of Johnson in UCLA, where you're talking about, how does this entire cost-effect model really work? Where, I really don't want to spend time about it, is that it brings to a very interesting phenomenon of issues for tomorrow based on leading to a adaptation of a model called CAS, or complex adaptive systems. So if you look at it from a strategic perspective, there are new business models to add value. Technology and contexts are shifting. There are multiple stakeholders. Go down to scales that with the mother, or what you call only the customer or the shareholder is the stakeholder. You are now talking about multiple stakeholder, including what you talk about in marketing called as extended product liabilities. You know, I may have, for example, Coke, where he has been working, has a very fundamental issue with the PET bottles which are thrown out. Because if the PET bottle is possibly going to be dumped in the sewage in my backyard, I fundamentally get, I'm a stakeholder in this entire process. And somebody sitting in Atlanta will have to answer that. And that is the level of accountabilities which are getting pushed into the system, and that's everything. Earlier you were talking about analytics. There is a lot of talks about analytics, but from there, are you able to realize patterns which are evolving? Because patterns are the only thing which will predict you to predict. So do you have patterns to look at it? There are a lot of TED Talks available in terms of pattern recognitions, which was a computing issue, which is getting into management, into decision making, by telling us that can you really look at not just data based decision making, can you look at pattern based decision making, because there are multiple patterns which are evolving, and where do I put my bet on? And if my pattern succeeds, then I make my money, I am successful. Human capital, the whole issue of talent flow. You know, getting skilled talent is one of those fundamental issues in the organizations. That is why organizations are increasingly getting into, you know, diversity, looking at PWDs, looking at people with, you know, women, looking at other marginal groups, because I really want to get talent into my organizations to do the work. That's why if you look at Toyota and a couple of manufacturing firms are redesigning their production lines to accommodate older people, retired people. If there are talent shortage is becoming a huge global issue. Alternate work models. You know, how does work happen? You are really talking about much more collaborative and connected work which is happening. For example, in manufacturing, the whole system of 3D printing is virtually changing manufacturing. You can even, outsourcing has changed the way services are delivered. Technology, telecommunications can change that. Likewise, 3D printing is actually changing the way manufacturing or product this thing is delivered. And gone are the time, if you go to NID in Ahmadabad, you will actually see how through 3D printers, if I possibly want something, how I can go to a CMPOC and possibly get it manufactured there and there. And that's some of those futures which are really coming up. Which brings to this industry, within these issues, how about this job satisfaction levels? You know, how do you keep up the engagement level of people? Of course, innovation in a connected world, understanding the customer, which is one of the most important part, is that they are fragmented, they are highly demanding. But as an organization, do I really get into the mind and find out how daily lives are lived? Can I really understand that, how the possible can understand how daily lives are lived? For example, at IIMA, one of our fundamental issues is we believe in the case study method. And every case study of possibly was around 30 to 40 pages. And in a day, the student has to work on 120 pages of case reading before you come to class. And we are pretty ruthless in the class. Possibly that ruthlessness and that exposure, in 2 years of a program, the student gets exposed to, we calculated close to 400 decision situations of how actually managers make decisions. And that possibly has led to possibly the success of an IMA. That you are really preparing a person through this hard work in terms of possible scenarios. That's where when we meet students a couple of years down the line, they say that, sir, I come up with that situation, I remember Ulaganathan Madan. Because Ulaganathan Madan is one of our cases characters. You have to take a decision in the class, what do you do with it? Say that I face a situation like that, and that Ulaganathan Madan was flashing in my mind. That how do you handle this character? We're talking about that. Now we are sitting with a set of people and we expected them to write huge essays. sit in an exam for 3 hours and write 25 page, 30 page answers. Now we are finding a set of people who cannot write that much because they have never held a pen for that long. They have actually typed. They are using SMS language. 10 years down the line, these kids whom I meet in the schools are the kids who are going to sit in the classrooms of IIMA. Can we teach them? We have a problem. And fundamentally, we are actually looking at that. That can we adapt ourselves and teach them is because they have learned in a very, very different fashion. And 2 years later, or 12, if we are facing that problem 10 years, 12 years later the corporates will have to face it is because these are the guys who would go and join corporates who possibly are more comfortable taking a decision over WhatsApp rather than writing a 3-page policy note. How do we really handle that complexity, which is one of the big challenges? That's where the organizational designs are moving out. Gone are the days of the rather functional, the large organizational designs of tomorrow. You are getting into much more collaborative and connected stakeholder-centered designs. But that brings an entire issue. For many years, I think somebody else also, I was looking at the papers, one of the very big fashions of today's organizations is about work-life balance. But work-life balance is dead. The time is gone because you can't really look at balancing with only work and life. You are now talking about work, life, technology, geography, and ethical balance. Employees of Facebook in France have won the legal right not to check their emails after 6 o'clock. It's a legal right. I also have, because what happens is that with technology, work has permeated into your space. You become addicted. That's why in IIMA people say a couple of us are categorized as the AIDS patients of IIMA, which is actually called acute email deficiency syndrome. You keep on checking your emails and SMSs. And it's 24 hours, and if you find that you don't have email, you get into a problem. Sometimes you will shake and look whether Google, you're always worried that whether Google service is down. Because, I want my SMSs, I want my, these things. I see some of the team members working with me, happily online on WhatsApp at 1:30, 2:30 in the night. Which actually means you are bloody running a 24/7 cycle. And where do you really talk about the work-life balances? Unless you have technology and geography balance to fundamentally work with it. And that's where this entire complexity is taking up. Of course, the last one is that within that you have, but along with that brings in the huge concept of how do you be ethical in using this technology and the spaces. It's a huge issue which is coming up. Of course, then the responsibilities, the corporate citizenship. I need to be a good citizen as a corporate. I need to be sustainable. Earlier we said that we need to take care of the future environment because we owe it to the next generation that we take care of it. Now it says that you don't owe it. It's your responsibility because this environment is not yours. You have just borrowed it from the future. And you better handle that. That's the level at which sustainability is really getting into it. And of course, the last one is looking at work from a decent work principle. Fundamentally, then work has to be decent, which is a basic principle of trade unionism, which comes that the basic work has to be decent enough. There has to be safety, there has to be security. There has to be one of the biggest research areas in management today called happiness. Finally organizational systems are supposed to make you happy. Even the definition of happiness, that's where there is a lot of work which does about happiness, is because happiness and hope. In fact, there are people in FMS here, in fact, one of them have joined us, who are really working on the concept of hope. But where you're really going about, are you really, organizations really giving hope, or are you putting it pessimism? Do you really allow people to search for what you call as happiness, rather than greed? These are some of those very, very interesting issues which are coming up tomorrow, which possibly might shape up. That's where you are really getting up into complex adaptive systems. Tomorrow's organizations are going to be complex, and managers need to work in that complexity. And complex systems are complex is because they constantly interact with many different entities, and each entity is shaping your organization. The way possibly the Delhi Metro runs shapes how this college is run. You may not see a direct connection, but there is definitely an interactive effect. One is an educational institution, another is a public transport utility, but there is a common space in which both of them really interact. And you are interacting thus with hundreds of such entities, including your telecom service provider and Google and Facebook. Everybody has a small pie in that interaction, and imagine the khichdi which you are making about. Twitter, which is sitting somewhere, has an influence on how do you possibly run your classes. They are acting and reacting to each other. Each entity is acting and reacting to each other. But the beauty of the system is there is no single centralized control point. It's highly democratic. There are multi-centered control points. That's the democracy, which creates patterns of behavior. And what as managers or organizations do is capitalize on this possible patterns of behavior. And that is why it's called